The morning of my mother's 66th birthday, she texted me. "Oops, we forgot your seat at dinner tonight. So embarrassing. You know how these things get." I read that text 3 times. Not because I was hurt, because I wanted to memorize the exact wording. My husband Daniel was standing in our kitchen, drinking his coffee. When I showed him my phone, he read it once, set down his mug, and said, very quietly, "Tell me what time." That was at 7:15 the morning. Before the text arrived, the day had been the particular kind of ordinary that only Saturdays can manage, the kind where the house is quiet, in a way that feels earned, not empty. Daniel had been up before me. He usually was. By the time I came downstairs with my laptop and my hair still half-pinned, he was finishing a phone call, his coffee in one hand, his back to the window. Late October light fell through in thin strips across the kitchen table where my laptop sat waiting. I worked in marketing for Atrium Health, which meant I was always, in some loose sense, working healthcare campaigns don't pause on weekends, just because you've put on socks without a plan for the day. I'd been halfway through a copy draft for a new cardiology initiative. Trying to decide if "your heart works hard for you" was too on the nose as a tagline. It was. Almost certainly. I heard Daniel wrap up his call. "Marcus, just make sure the Saturday covers are set. I'll check in later if needed. The South End location, yeah, have the numbers ready." I didn't register it. He had 4 restaurants, and there were always numbers, always a Marcus, always some location that needed something sorted on a Saturday. I went back to my tagline problem. Then Mrs. Eleanor knocked on the kitchen door. She was 81, lived in the house next door, and had been fighting her mailbox latch every Saturday morning for the 3 years we'd lived on Wickersham Lane. The latch sticks. Her son keeps meaning to fix it. I'd started checking in on weekend mornings with whatever we'd brewed, partly because I liked her, and partly because someone should. "You are going to spoil me," she said, taking the mug with both hands the way she always did, cradling it like it was warm from more than just coffee. "That's the plan," I said. When I came back inside, my phone was lit up on the kitchen table. I picked it up without thinking. Read it. Put it down. Picked it up again. "Oops, we forgot your seat at dinner tonight. So embarrassing. You know how these things get." She'd used the word "we," not "I." We. A shared mistake. A collective accident. Brooke. I didn't arrive at that conclusion out of paranoia. I arrived at it the same way you eventually recognize any recurring pattern, by having watched it long enough that its shape becomes familiar. Brooke had called my mother 3 times in the past 10 days. Carter had mentioned it, innocent as he always was, with no sense that he was handing over anything useful. 3 calls in 10 days, right before a birthday dinner that had somehow materialized without a seat for me. The text had arrived at 7:15. The dinner was at 7 in the evening. There had been time. There had been a seating chart, a reservation, 12 hours notice. Somewhere in that span of time, the oversight had been considered and concluded acceptable. I opened a new message, typed 2 words, "No problem," and sent it before I let myself think past them. Then I set the phone face down on the table and sat for a moment with my hands flat on the wood. A colleague of mine had said something once, in a project debrief that ran too long on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd been talking about a client account. She'd finally walked away from one of those professional relationships that had stopped working years before anyone admitted it. "The hardest seats to leave," she'd said, "are the ones we were never comfortable in." I'd nodded and moved to the next agenda item without stopping to hear it properly. I heard it now. Or some part of me did, somewhere below the level where I was still deciding how I felt about any of this. Daniel was still by the window. I walked over and held out my phone. He read it. His face did something I didn't quite catch, not surprise. More like confirmation. The kind of expression you make when a number comes in exactly where you expected it. He set down his mug. "Tell me what time." 7, I said. "The Meridian Grill." He didn't look up at me immediately. "South End? Why?" He looked up then. "We'll talk when you're ready." I wasn't ready yet. But something had shifted, not anger, not the hot flash of it that arrives when you're genuinely surprised. Something older and quieter than that. The kind of thing that has been sitting at the back of a drawer for a long time, not making noise, not asking to be dealt with, waiting, the way patient things wait, for the right morning to finally be taken out and looked at. I went upstairs to get dressed. I knew exactly which dress. I didn't go upstairs right away. I stood at the kitchen table with my hands still on my phone, and the house was very quiet. And the October light kept doing what October light does in Charlotte, moving slowly, almost visibly, across the floor. Daniel had gone to the back porch to finish his second coffee. I could hear the faint creak of the chair he always took when he needed 5 minutes with his own thoughts. I sat down. The thing about a message like, "Oops, we forgot your seat," is that it doesn't land like a sudden blow. It lands like confirmation. You don't gasp. You nod at something you've been too polite to name. And in the space between sending "no problem" and meaning it, a door opens in your mind, the kind you usually keep firmly shut on a Saturday morning when you have taglines to write and neighbors to check on, and everything behind it comes walking out like it had only been waiting for an invitation. The first thing that came was the graduation. May 2011. Chapel Hill. The kind of southern spring day that makes you believe weather is a moral position, warm, clear. No argument from the sky. I'd walked across that stage with a degree in communications and the specific private joy of someone who had paid for most of it herself, working summers at a hotel front desk, and one very long semester as a campus tour guide who smiled through shin splints. My mother was in the crowd. So was Carter. He'd driven 3 hours from Raleigh, which he would have told you unprompted, and which my mother repeated back to anyone who asked where they'd come from. 3 hours. He drove 3 hours. The implication being that love was measured in miles logged, in inconvenience overcome, in the visible effort of showing up. I found them after the ceremony near the fountain where everyone gathered. My mother was facing Carter, not the crowd. Her phone raised. Smile, click. One more, click. She had the look she got when she was proud, slightly flushed, eyes bright, the particular posture of a woman who felt her life was going well and wanted it documented. Carter laughed at something. She laughed too. I stood about 6 feet away in my robe and my flat shoes and my diploma, waiting. She turned eventually. "Oh, there you are. We were just Carter. Get in here with her." And so, the photo of my graduation became, primarily, a photo of Carter at my graduation. He was generous about it. He always was. He had no idea there was anything to be generous about. On the drive home, my mother said, "You know, Carter didn't have to come. He had a deposition Monday." She said it warmly. The way you say something you think is a compliment. That's real love, Elle. When someone shows up even when it costs them. I said I know. I looked out the window. I thought about the hotel desk, and the tour groups, and the shin splints, and I understood that in my mother's accounting, the cost Carter had paid 3 hours in a car outweighed the 4 years I had paid to be standing there. Not because she was cruel, because she had simply never thought to add me up. That was the thing I'd been carrying around since I was 22 and hadn't figured out how to put down. The Christmas memory arrived quieter, the way secondary pains do. 3 months ago, my mother's house on Fieldstone Drive, the dining room she kept for occasions. The good tablecloth. The candlesticks that came out 4 times a year. Carter and Brooke had the seats closest to the kitchen door, which meant they were closest to my mother, which meant they were at the center of the conversation where to renovate, where Carter's firm was expanding, what Brooke's sister was doing with her degree. My mother poured wine for Brooke first, then Carter, then their end of the table. The bottle made it halfway to me and stopped when someone said something that made her laugh. I was at the extension piece, the folding section they added when there were too many people for the main table. It wobbles slightly on the right side. I'd eaten Christmas dinner on it for the past 4 years without saying anything. Because what would I say I've noticed? I'm always at the wobbling end, and what would that solve? After dinner, I cleared the plates from my end of the table. Nobody asked me to. Nobody stopped me either. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing glasses while laughter came from the dining room about something Carter had said. And I thought, this is what invisible looks like from the inside. Not dramatic, not even painful in the sharp way. Just the slow accumulation of being the person whose presence doesn't change the shape of the room. I'd been standing at that kitchen table for 15 minutes, I realized. Just standing. Daniel came in from the porch and looked at me without asking. I told him about the graduation, about the Christmas, about the 3 years of Christmases before that, and the birthday dinners where the photograph of the cake didn't have me in it, and the phone calls that started with Carter thanks and ended before they got around to asking what I thought. I wasn't crying. That surprised me. Or it would have if I'd had any energy left for surprise. I was just listing facts, the way you list symptoms, when you finally decided to see a doctor not in distress, just in an effort to get the whole thing said out loud at last. Daniel listened without interrupting. He had a gift for that, for stillness that didn't feel like absence. When I finished, he set down his mug on the counter. Do you want to go? Not we should go. Not let's show them. Just, do you want to? Yes, I said. Not because I'm angry. I know. Then why do I feel like I'm about to do something I can't take back? He was quiet for a moment. Because you are. He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said most true things. The Meridian Grill is one of mine, Elle. Marcus runs the floor on Saturdays. I looked at him. Your mother picked it, he said. I don't think she knew. I turned that over for a second. My mother, who had seen the restaurant on a magazine cover, and called the reservation line and booked a table for 8 for 7, as it turned out at the place my husband co-owned. Sitting right now in her house on Fieldstone Drive, probably deciding what to wear, certain she had managed the evening exactly as she intended. No, I said. She didn't know. Something settled in me then. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Something more like the quiet that comes when a long equation finally balances. I'd been a little outside the frame for 37 years. Tonight I thought the frame was going to be a different size. I went upstairs. I knew exactly which dress. The dress was burgundy, deep, almost wine dark, the kind of color that doesn't ask permission from the room it walks into. I'd bought it 2 years ago for the Atrium Health Gala, the night I'd presented a rebrand in front of 200 people, and the applause at the end had lasted long enough to be real. I'd worn it twice since then. Once to a colleague's retirement dinner, once to a fundraiser for the hospital's pediatric wing, and each time for the same reason. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because there are clothes you wear when something matters. And this was the one I reached for when I needed to remember that. I took it off the hanger and put it on without ceremony. The mirror showed what it always showed in that dress, a woman who had made decisions and could live with them. I fixed my hair properly the way I almost never bothered on a Saturday and put on the earrings I kept in the back of the jewelry box. Small gold hoops. Nothing dramatic, but chosen. Daniel was in the bedroom doorway when I turned around, his tie halfway done. He was working on it with the focused concentration he gave to small mechanical problems, not distracted, just methodical. He retied it, looked at it, retied it again. You've done it correctly twice, I said. 3 times is how you know. He made the call to Marcus while I was putting on my shoes. Stood at the window with his back to me. Same posture as the morning, same quiet economy of words. We'll be coming in around 7, no announcement. Private room. If it ends up being needed, just have it ready. A pause. Yeah, we'll see. He didn't tell Marcus why. He didn't explain the situation or prepare anyone for anything specific. He just made sure the door was unlocked, in case we needed it. That was very like him. We left the house at 6:15, which gave us more time than necessary, but neither of us suggested waiting. The evening had cooled since afternoon. Charlotte in October runs warm until it doesn't, and today it had decided, somewhere around 5 o'clock, to become autumn for real. I could smell it through the window I cracked open on my side of the car, wet leaves and something faintly sweet from the neighbor's camphor tree. We drove without much conversation for a while. Daniel had the radio on low, a station neither of us had actively chosen, something soft that neither of us bothered to change. The city moved past the windows, in its Saturday night mode restaurants, filling up, couples walking toward whatever they'd reserved weeks ago, the particular ambient light of a mid-sized southern city that doesn't quite manage to dazzle but knows how to be pleasant. I thought about Brooke. It wasn't the first time I'd thought about Brooke in connection to my mother, but this was the first time I allowed myself to follow the thought all the way through. 3 phone calls in 10 days. Brooke, who had married Carter 8 years ago with the specific social efficiency of someone who understood that in-laws were an asset to be cultivated or a liability to be managed. She had cultivated my mother with the diligence of someone tending a garden she intended to inherit. Weekly calls, holiday visits, a consistent attentiveness to my mother's preferences that I, with my 40-hour work weeks and my Myers Park house and my life that didn't arrange itself around anyone's approval, had never quite matched. My mother experienced this as love. I didn't blame her for that. What I'd understood this morning, turning the word we over in my mind, was that somewhere in those 3 phone calls, someone had said something about the dinner, the guest list, the seating arrangement, and whatever had been said had landed in a mind that was already inclined to agree. It was Brooke, I said. The dinner. Daniel glanced at me, then back at the road. Probably. She called Mom 3 times this week. I know. You mentioned. I looked out at the passing street. Does it matter? He was quiet for a few seconds. Not the silence of someone who doesn't have an answer, but the silence of someone choosing which true thing to say. It doesn't matter who planted the idea, he said. Your mother still sent the text. I sat with that. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't need a response, because it's already said everything that needs to be said, and adding to it would only make it smaller. My mother had sent the text. My mother had picked up her phone, typed, "Oops," and pressed send. Whatever had been suggested to her, whatever argument had been made or implication offered in those 3 phone calls, she had been the one to decide. We stopped at a light on South Boulevard. The rain that had threatened all afternoon finally arrived, light and unhurried, spotting the windshield. Daniel turned on the wipers. The city went briefly soft through the wet glass, and then clear again with each sweep of the blade. I looked at my own reflection in the passenger window, the dark of the street behind me, the faint overlay of my own face on the moving city. There is something clarifying about seeing yourself in glass at night. You're not looking at a mirror which is designed to flatter, or a photograph which is designed to last. You're looking at a trick of light, here and gone with the next street lamp, which means what you see is probably closer to true than most reflections get. The woman looking back at me had been trying to fit into a seat she'd never been comfortable in for 37 years. She'd been polite about it, accommodating. She'd cleared the plates at Christmas without being asked, and smiled in photographs that were mostly of someone else, and answered every no problem with enough sincerity that she'd almost convinced herself it was true. I thought, not tonight, not said out loud, not declared to anyone, just thought, in the same tone you use to close a drawer. The Meridian Grill appeared at the end of the block. Amber light spilled through its front windows onto the wet sidewalk in a long, warm rectangle. Inside, people moved in that underwater way restaurant patrons move when seen from outside, slow, comfortable, unhurried by anything that had happened to anyone else today. I could see the silhouette of a large table near the center window. A woman at one end with her arm raised, gesturing, the shape of someone used to holding the room. "Ready?" Daniel said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He'd already found parking and was reaching for his door handle, trusting that the answer was yes. I got out of the car. The rain was light enough that neither of us rushed. We stopped on the sidewalk about 20 feet from the entrance. Not by agreement. We just both slowed at the same moment, the way you do when you're approaching something that deserves a second look before you commit to it. The rain had stayed light, more mist than rain by now, the kind that collects on your shoulders without you noticing until you're already inside. The Meridian Grill's front window was large and unobstructed, the kind of design choice that says we have nothing to hide in here. Come look at the beautiful people eating beautiful food. From where we stood, the interior was laid out like a stage. My mother's table was center floor. Of course it was. She'd have requested that, or Brooke would have requested it on her behalf, the table that places you in the middle of the room, visible from every other table, the one that announces, this party is the kind worth noticing. 7 people around it. Carter on my mother's right, which was always his position, the firstborn's position, the place of historical precedence, that nobody in our family had ever formally decided, and nobody had ever thought to question. Brooke beside him, one arm resting on the table, holding court the way she did in rooms she decided were hers. 2 of my mother's friends from her years at the elementary school, both women I'd known since childhood. A cousin from Concord I recognized by his height. Aunt Cheryl at the far end, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead even though there was nothing to read, which was where they always lived. And at the very edge of the table, not quite part of it, not quite separate, a single chair that didn't match the others. Not in the seating arrangement, not assigned, just pulled up. An afterthought given physical form, upholstered differently from the rest, angled slightly outward as if even the furniture understood its own provisional status. That chair was meant to be mine. I looked at it for long enough to memorize it the particular way it sat apart from the clean, curated line of the other seats, and then I looked at Brooke, who had one hand raised now, index finger pointed upward in the universal gesture of someone making a point they've been working toward for several minutes. The whole table was watching her. My mother was smiling the smile she reserved for people she wanted to impress. I'd spent the better part of my adult life trying to earn that smile. The wedding came back to me the way things do when you've been keeping them at a careful distance all at once. Not because you've decided to remember, but because something has finally unlocked the room. June 2015. The Charlotte Country Club, because Daniel's mother had offered and it had seemed unkind to refuse. 200 guests, an outdoor ceremony that stayed dry by some intervention of collective goodwill, a band that played the same 5 songs in different configurations for 3 hours. We danced. We cut the cake. We moved through the evening in the way that wedding couples move, touching every table briefly, never quite landing. My mother sat with Carter and Brooke for most of the reception. I noticed this the way you notice recurring weather, not with alarm, just with the recognition that it had happened again. When the band played the first song Daniel and I danced to, I looked for her in the crowd. I found her at the round table in the corner, leaning toward Brooke, laughing at something. The something was probably about Carter's firm, or Brooke's sister's new baby, or the house they were looking at in Dilworth. The something was probably fine. She turned her chair slightly away from the dance floor to have the conversation more comfortably. The photographer found me near the end of the night. "Do you want a photo with your mother before people start leaving?" "Yes," I'd said. "Of course," but by the time we looked for her, she'd stepped outside with Carter and Brooke to say goodbye to the conquered relatives. And the moment required waiting, and the waiting required interrupting, and the interrupting felt like too much to ask on a night that was already complicated, in the way that important nights always are. We took the photo the next afternoon instead, just the two of us at her kitchen table, my wedding dress traded for jeans. She looked happy in it. I looked like someone who had traded the real version of something for a copy and decided not to mention it. There is no photo of us from the wedding itself. I've thought about this exactly once before tonight, and when I thought about it, I told myself it was fine. Daniel hadn't moved. He was standing beside me with his hands in his pockets, watching the table through the glass, saying nothing. He'd been very good tonight at saying nothing at the right moments. I almost asked him to keep walking. The thought arrived fully formed. We could just go somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Just the two of us. Somewhere with no history attached to the wallpaper. We could drive to that place. In Noda he'd been meaning to take me to. The one with the wood-fired oven and no reservations. And I could order something that came with a side salad I didn't want, and we could talk about nothing in particular, and go home and let tonight dissolve into all the other evenings that had passed without incident. That was a version of tonight that existed. We could have it, and then Brooke said something, and the whole table laughed, and my mother put her hand on Brooke's arm, the way she used to put her hand on mine when I was very small, and had said something that pleased her quick, warm, there, and gone. And I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. She didn't hate me. She had never hated me. There was no malice in any of it. Not the graduation, not the Christmas table, not the chair with the wrong upholstery that was meant to be my seat tonight. There was just the simple, devastating arithmetic of a woman who had decided, without ever quite deciding, where her attention lived. Carter had gotten there first and set up camp, and the territory had never been redistributed. It wasn't cruelty. It was something smaller and harder to argue with than cruelty. It was habit. That should have made it easier to swallow. Instead, it made it possible to let go, because you cannot negotiate with hatred, but you also cannot fix it with enough good behavior, or enough patience, or enough years of no-problem texts sent before the coffee has finished brewing. Hatred is at least a relationship. What my mother had given me was an absence, and I had spent 37 years filling that absence with myself, pouring myself into a space that didn't hold the shape of me, wondering each time why nothing stayed. "Okay," I said. Daniel looked at me. "I'm not going to ask you to drive past," I said. "I just wanted to say it out loud so it didn't stay in my head." He nodded once, like this made complete sense, because for him it probably did. Then he opened the door. The smell of rosemary and charred wood came through first, then the warmth. Then, from across the room, I heard my mother say, "Oh, in that particular register, she used for surprises she hadn't prepared herself for. We walked in. The Meridian Grill on a Saturday evening ran at a particular frequency, warm, unhurried, the kind of room that has decided what it is and doesn't need to announce it. Amber light from the pendants overhead, the low-layered sound of a room full of conversations that had nothing to do with each other, the smell I'd noticed at the door deepening as we stepped inside into something richer. Roasted garlic, wine, the specific char of a wood-fired grill doing serious work somewhere in the back. 30 tables, maybe? Roughly 2/3 occupied. A Saturday night in October with reservations made weeks out. The kind of evening that fills itself. Marcus was at the host stand when we walked in. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with the unhurried posture of someone who had managed difficult rooms for a long time and no longer needed to signal authority through urgency. He looked up from the reservation book. His eyes found Daniel, and something in his expression shifted not dramatically. Not into anything you could photograph and call a reaction. It was subtler than that. The slight straightening of a person who has just recognized something that matters to them professionally. He came around the stand to greet us. And here's the thing about a room that belongs to someone. It knows when that person enters it. Not in any mystical sense. Just in the ordinary, physical sense that employees notice their employer, and the noticing spreads outward in the unconscious way that posture and attention spread in any enclosed space. I counted 12 staff members in my eye line at that moment. Servers, a runner, the sommelier near the wine display, 2 people behind the service bar. None of them stopped what they were doing. None of them made a display of it. But somewhere in the moment between our walking in and Marcus reaching us, each of them stood, very slightly, straighter, the way people do when the room's center of gravity shifts. It wasn't a performance. That was the thing. A performance you can dismiss. This was just true. Brooke saw it first. I watched her register Marcus's trajectory across the floor, watched her eyes follow it back to Daniel, and then to me, and then return to Daniel with the expression of someone rapidly recalculating a sum that is coming out differently than expected. She didn't say anything. She reached for her wine glass without looking at it and set it down again without drinking. Carter was a few seconds behind her. He was mid-sentence when Marcus reached us something with his hands, telling a story, and he trailed off. He looked at Daniel. He looked at Marcus, who was shaking Daniel's hand with the particular warmth of someone who sees their employer on a weekend and is genuinely glad to do so. Carter had worked in corporate law for 15 years, and he spoke the language of professional hierarchies without needing it translated for him. You could see the comprehension arrive in his face, the way weather arrives on an open plain, visible from a distance, moving fast, impossible to stop once it started. My mother looked up last. She had been laughing at something Aunt Cheryl had said, her head tilted back slightly. The birthday laugh, the one that came out at parties when everything was going as planned. She felt the shift in the table before she saw us, felt it in the way Carter had gone quiet, in the way Brooke had put down her glass. She turned. Oh! The sound of it landed in her throat before it made it to her face. Surprise, and then the smile that assembled itself immediately over the surprise. The one she kept ready for social situations that required her to appear more prepared than she was. "Elle, you came after all." She said it warmly. In her voice, it was perfectly genuine. She had expected me to stay home. I was certain of that, and my presence required a rapid editorial in the story she'd been composing all day about the evening. But she was good at that. She'd been editing the story of our family for decades. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. Aunt Cheryl turned in her chair, tracking the moment. She looked at me, then at Daniel, and then at Marcus, who had stepped slightly to Daniel's left with the professional positioning of someone accompanying, not leading. Cheryl removed her reading glasses from the top of her head, a gesture she only made when she was paying close attention to something. "Is that Elle's husband?" she said to the woman beside her, in what she likely believed was a quieter voice than it was. "He's taller than I remembered." The woman beside her nodded, because there was nothing else to do. Marcus leaned toward Daniel. His voice was low, not secretive, just calibrated for the distance between them, not the room. "Mr. Marsh, good to see you." A brief, warm pause, "Mrs. Marsh." He looked at me directly when he said it, and there was nothing in his expression except professional courtesy, which was exactly right. Then he glanced, once, at the table, at the 7 people arranged around it, at the chair off to one side with its different upholstery and its slightly outward angle, and when he looked back at Daniel, something had been understood between them without being said. "We have the private dining room available this evening, if you'd prefer," he said. And then, quieter still, with the particular tact of a man who has navigated difficult situations long enough to know how to offer something without forcing it. "Sir, shall I remove their table? We could arrange something more comfortable for—" The sentence didn't need to be finished. I looked at my mother. She was watching me. Not with the social smile anymore that had slipped somewhere in the last 30 seconds, during Marcus's arrival, or Carter's recognition, or Aunt Cheryl's commentary. I couldn't have said exactly when. What was on her face now was something I had no practice name for. It was not guilt. Guilt requires having decided something was wrong, and she hadn't yet. It was earlier than guilt. The first second of understanding. The precise moment before the story revises itself. She was looking at me the way you look at a room you thought you knew, when the light changes and the proportions turn out to be different than you thought. She was beginning to understand what she had chosen. And I was about to show her what choosing looked like, from someone who had had 37 years of practice at the quiet version and was done with it entirely. I turned back to Marcus. "No," I said. "Please, it's my mother's birthday. Let them enjoy their evening." Marcus absorbed this without blinking. He had the professional stillness of a man who had accommodated stranger requests than this one, without registering surprise, and if he found anything unusual in being told not to exercise an option he'd just offered, he kept it to himself with the ease of long practice. "Of course," he said. "The private room, then. Right this way." I turned to my mother's table one more time. She was still watching me. The social smile had not returned. She sat very straight in her chair, the birthday posture, the one that had been holding all evening. The position of a woman presiding, but something in it had shifted, some load-bearing element I couldn't name precisely, and the result was that she looked, for the first time I could remember, uncertain. Not of me. Of herself. Of the shape of the room she'd been so sure she understood. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. "I hope it's a good night." I meant it. That was the thing I hadn't anticipated, that I would mean it. That standing there with the option to remove her table, and the choice not to, I would find that what I actually wished her was a pleasant evening among people who made her happy, because that had always been what I'd wanted, just never for me at the cost of myself. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I followed Marcus across the dining room. The private room at the Meridian was smaller than the main floor, 8 seats. A round table, warm lighting that came from 2 sources instead of 12, the effect being something closer to candlelight than restaurant. There was a window that looked onto the alley and a painting on the south wall of the Blue Ridge in autumn. Daniel pulled out my chair. I sat down. A different server appeared immediately. Water poured without being asked. Menus placed with quiet efficiency. "Take your time," Marcus said, and withdrew. We sat for a moment without speaking. On the table between us, a candle in a small glass, 2 menus I hadn't opened yet, the faint sound of the main dining room coming through the wall like weather from another country. Daniel reached across and put his hand over mine. That was all. He didn't say, "You did the right thing." He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He said nothing at all, which was the only correct response to a moment that had already said everything it needed to say. I picked up the menu. The lamb looked good. Across the dining room, I couldn't see my mother's table from where we sat, but I could construct it precisely from what I'd read in their faces before we walked away. Carter would be quiet. Carter went quiet when he was thinking hard, when the data required reassembly, and he needed to do that without interruption. Brooke would have her phone out by now. Not visibly. Not raised above the table, but in her lap, the way people do when they need a task to perform while they recalibrate. Her messages to Carter over the past week were, I suspected, going to look very different to him by the end of the evening. And my mother would be sitting with something she hadn't been given a script for. She was a woman who understood hospitality as a form of control, not in a sinister sense, but in the genuine sense that she experienced providing a beautiful table, a well-chosen restaurant, an organized guest list, as her primary form of influence over a room. She made the event, she shaped the evening, she decided who sat where and what the occasion meant. It was the authority she'd held all her life, the thing she was genuinely good at, and she was good at it in the way people are good at things they've practiced for decades, because the alternative felt like nothing at all. Tonight, in the restaurant she had chosen, with the guest list she had curated, and the seating arrangement she had approved. Someone had offered to remove her table at her daughter's discretion, and her daughter had said no. She had been pardoned, not punished, pardoned. And there is no good social script for being pardoned by someone you have spent 37 years not quite seeing. Because pardon implies that the other person had power they chose not to use, and the recognition of that power requires a complete revision of the story you've been telling yourself about who is indebted to whom. I ordered the lamb. Daniel ordered the duck. We shared a bottle of something the sommelier recommended when Daniel gave him approximate parameters, and it was very good, and we talked about nothing that had happened tonight, about the cardiology tagline I still hadn't solved, about a trip we'd been meaning to take to Asheville before the leaves went fully, about Mrs. Eleanor's mailbox latch, which Daniel had actually looked up and found was a $15 replacement part available at any hardware store. "I'll bring it over Tuesday," he said. "She'll say you don't have to." "I know. Bring coffee anyway." Obviously, I heard Aunt Cheryl before I saw her. Her voice carried from the direction of the main dining room, bright and carrying in the way voices do when their owner has had 2 glasses of wine and has recently processed surprising information. She was speaking to someone at the adjacent table, a couple she'd apparently struck up a conversation with, and what she was saying, with the serene confidence of someone delivering established fact, was, "Oh, yes, it's a family restaurant. My niece and her husband. We come here quite often, actually." There was a pause in which I imagined the couple nodding politely. "The lamb is exceptional," Aunt Cheryl added. "I always have the lamb." She'd had the salmon. I'd seen it on the table from across the room. But this was not really about the lamb. And we both knew it, and the version of me from 7 hours ago would have found it exhausting, and the version of me sitting in the private dining room with a glass of very good Burgundy found it, instead, quietly funny, the way things become funny when you've stopped needing them to be otherwise. We finished dinner without hurrying. The server brought the check without us asking for it, which meant Daniel had arranged it earlier, which was like him. We sat for another 20 minutes after, the way you sit in rooms you're comfortable in when there's nowhere else you'd rather be. When we left, I didn't walk through the main dining room. There was a side exit through the private wing, and we took it, and I stepped out into the October night without looking back. Standing at the car, I could see the front of the restaurant through its large window. My mother's table was still there, still occupied, people still in their seats. Carter had his arms crossed in the way he did when he was thinking through something he didn't have a position on yet. Brooke was looking at her phone, actually looking at it now, the under-the-table pretense abandoned. My mother was facing away from the window. Then she turned. She saw me through the glass. The distance was 30 feet, and the light was different on both sides, and there were 2 panes of glass between us and the reflection of the street behind me. But she saw me, and I saw her. And there was a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, in which we looked at each other across 30 feet and 37 years. And she opened her mouth as if there were something to say, and I waited in case there was. There wasn't. Not tonight. I nodded once. Got in the car. Daniel pulled out of the parking spot and we joined the Saturday night traffic heading north, the city moving past us in both directions. And the rain had stopped entirely now, and somewhere behind us, the Meridian Grill, continued its evening without us, its amber light falling through the windows onto the wet sidewalk, the same as it had been when we arrived. We drove home without the radio. Not in a heavy silence, just in the comfortable kind, the kind that married people develop over years of being together in small spaces, where the absence of sound isn't a statement about how anyone is feeling, but simply what the moment required. I watched Charlotte pass outside the window. The lit windows of apartment buildings, a gas station where a man was filling his tank with his collar turned up against the cold, a dog being walked by someone who looked like they'd rather be inside. The ordinary Saturday night world, going about itself. I thought about nothing in particular the whole way home, which was unusual for me. I'm a person who generally fills silence with interior monologue, with ongoing assessments of things said and unsaid, with the cataloging of details that didn't make sense until later. That night, the cataloging simply didn't start. I sat in the passenger seat in my burgundy dress and looked at the wet city streets and thought, good, that's enough for tonight. Carter called the next morning at 9:15. I was in the kitchen when my phone lit up with his name, and I let it ring twice before answering something I had never done with my brother in the 35 years we'd been alive at the same time. It wasn't deliberate. Or it was, but not in the punishing way. It was more that I'd suddenly remembered I was allowed to take a breath before answering a question. He said, "Hey, so..." A pause that contained, as far as I could tell, about 4 different things he'd decided not to say first. I didn't know about the restaurant. I knew Daniel was in the restaurant business, obviously, but I didn't know that one specifically was. He stopped. Started again. "Did you plan it?" I thought about that. In the honest sense, no. I had not known my mother would choose the Meridian Grill. I had not engineered anything. I had put on a dress and gotten in a car and walked into a room. "No," I said. "Mom planned it." There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough to mean he was absorbing the full weight of that sentence. Carter was a lawyer. He understood the structural importance of who was responsible for what. "She called me last night," he said finally. "After you left, she cried for about an hour." "I know she did. Are you?" He seemed to be selecting among several endings for that question, none of them quite fitting. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Actually fine, not the other kind." He was quiet again. In the background, I could hear his Saturday morning sounds, the particular acoustics of his kitchen. A child somewhere nearby, the Nespresso machine that he'd had for 4 years and had never figured out how to operate quietly. Brooke is he started and then reconsidered. Brooke is having a reflective morning. I didn't ask him to elaborate. I didn't have to. "Carter," I said, "I don't want to talk about Brooke right now. Or Mom. Can we just..." Yeah, of course." A breath. And then, "Daniel called me last night, actually. Around 10. Something in me went very still. Did he? He asked if I wanted him to comp Mom's check. As a birthday gesture. I waited. He said he'd think about it, Carter said. The pause between us was 3 seconds long. 4. Then Carter made a sound that was mostly exhale and partly laughter, and I made a similar sound, and neither of us said anything for a moment because there was nothing to say that would improve on the silence. "Did he?" I asked. "Comp it?" "He thought about it," Carter said. That was all either of us needed. We laughed in the particular way that siblings laugh when something has been true for a long time, and has finally been named not bright, not performed, but real. The first laugh we'd had, I realized, that wasn't shaped around someone else in the room. The first one, that was just ours. We talked for another 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the restaurant, or with Brooke, or with chairs that didn't fit the seating chart. We talked about his firm and my campaign, and the Asheville trip Daniel and I were considering, and by the time we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. A thread, thin but there, running between my brother and me that hadn't been there yesterday. Not repaired, not that simple, but present. Patricia called that afternoon. I let this one ring only once before answering. I don't know why the difference. Maybe because I was braced for it, or because I'd already spent the morning considering what she might say and how I might respond, running it through the way I run most things through before I'm called upon to perform them in real time. She started with the weather, which told me everything. My mother only discussed the weather with people she was not sure how to approach directly, which was a short list. "It's gotten cold," she said. "It has," I agreed. A pause. I thought we should talk about last night." "Okay." There was a misunderstanding about the seating. Brooke was handling the reservation, and there was a communication issue, and I didn't check it properly, and I should have. She continued for a while. She was good at this, at constructing an explanation that distributed responsibility broadly enough that no single person bore the full weight of it. Brooke handled the reservation. There was a communication issue. She should have checked. Things got busy. It was a carefully assembled architecture, and it would have been plausible if I hadn't known her for 37 years. And if I hadn't seen her face in the moment after Marcus asked his question, in the 3 seconds, before she'd had time to reconstruct her expression. She believed the explanation she was giving me. That was the hardest part. She wasn't lying in the sense of knowing the truth and choosing otherwise. She was lying in the deeper way, the way you lie when you've told a story so many times. It's become the version you actually remember. "I know you believe that, Mom," I said. Silence. "What does that mean?" Her voice had shifted, not angry, not defensive yet, just caught. "It means I love you," I said. "It means have a good week. Happy birthday, Mom." I hope yesterday was nice. I ended the call and set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment with my hand resting on the case. The house was very quiet. Daniel was somewhere outside. I could hear the faint sound of him doing something in the driveway, some small Saturday task he'd been putting off. Through the kitchen window, the yard was ordinary. The camphor tree, the wooden fence, the light that in late October arrives low and at an angle that makes everything look considered. I thought about the wedding album. It was in the closet in the guest room, one of those heavy cloth-covered books that the photographer's studio had produced 6 months after the wedding in an era when that was still what people did. I hadn't opened it in years. I knew what was in it. Daniel and I at the ceremony, Daniel and I cutting the cake, Daniel and I with his parents, and with mine, and with both families together, and with our friends from college, and from work, and from the years before we became what we were. I knew every photo in it without looking, because I'd looked at all of them once, carefully, and then put the book away. There was no photo of just my mother and me. I had known this for 9 years, and had never spoken it out loud, and had not, until tonight, understood that it was something that needed to be spoken. Not as an accusation, not as a claim for anything, just as a fact that deserved to exist in the open, instead of in the closed-off room where I'd been keeping it, next to the graduation and the Christmas table and the chair with the wrong upholstery. Here is what I knew. I could not fix my mother's journey. I could not go back and take the photograph, or rearrange the chairs or make her see, at 40 or 50 or 60, what she hadn't been willing to look at. She would process last night in whatever way she was capable of processing it, and it would be imperfect and probably incomplete, and that was hers to carry, not mine. I had been carrying her journey alongside my own for 37 years. I was putting it down now, not dramatically. The same way you put down a bag you've been holding so long, you stopped noticing the weight, just setting it on the floor, straightening up, and finding, with some surprise, that your shoulders still remembered what it felt like not to hold anything. Daniel knocked on the back door frame before coming in from the driveway, a habit he'd developed because I startled easily, and he'd learned to announce himself in small ways. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since yesterday morning, not checking, not worried, just present. I'm thinking, he said, "I'll make dinner next Saturday. Here, just us." I looked at him. "Perfect," I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant a single word in longer than I wanted to count. The following Saturday, Daniel made pasta. Not anything complicated, a simple amatriciana. Guanciale crisped in the pan until it caught just at the edges. San Marzano tomatoes he'd been keeping in the pantry for a recipe he never quite got to. The kitchen filled up with the smell of it an hour before we ate. Rendered pork fat and tomato and the particular sweetness of onion going slow in oil, the kind of smell that makes a house feel occupied in the fullest sense of the word. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and watched him cook. We had a dining room, proper one, with a table that seated 8, the kind of room that gets used at Thanksgiving and for certain dinner parties, and otherwise exists in a state of pleasant readiness that never quite becomes warm. We didn't use it tonight. We used the kitchen table, the one I'd been sitting at last Saturday morning when the text arrived, the one with the ring mark near the corner from a mug. Someone had set down without a coaster sometime before we owned it. It had 2 place settings, both of them placed deliberately, for the people who were going to sit in them. I thought about the extension table at my mother's house on Fieldstone Drive, the one that wobbles on the right side, the one I'd eaten Christmas dinner on for 4 years in a row without saying anything. I thought about the chair at the Meridian Grill, with the different upholstery, angled slightly outward. I looked at my own chair, which was just a chair old wood, a cushion we'd recovered twice, slightly uneven on the back legs in a way neither of us had ever gotten around to fixing, and I thought, this one's mine, not assigned, not approximate, not pulled up at the last moment as an afterthought. Mine in the way that things become yours when you stop waiting for someone else to hand them to you and simply sit down. Daniel put a bowl in front of me, sat across, poured more wine for both of us without asking. "How's the pasta?" he said. "Perfect." "Yeah?" "The guanciale. What about it?" "It's just right." He looked at me across the table with the mild satisfaction of someone who has done a thing well and doesn't need it celebrated, only noticed. We ate without rushing. Outside, rain had come in from the west, the way it does in Charlotte in late October, settling in for the evening. Not violent, just present, I had spoken to Patricia once more since Sunday. A short call on Wednesday. Practical, she'd wanted to know if Daniel and I would be coming to Thanksgiving, which was a month away, which was enough time for anything to happen or nothing to happen, which was probably why she was asking now instead of waiting. I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was fine. We hung up after 4 minutes, which was the length of a phone call between two people who have not yet figured out what the new distance between them is supposed to feel like. I didn't know if we ever would. I'd made my peace with not knowing. A woman I used to work with had said something once, in a conference room on a Tuesday, about a client account she'd walked away from after years of trying to make it work. She'd said, "The hardest seats to leave are the ones we were never comfortable in." I'd smiled and moved on to the next agenda item and understood, with the specific incomprehension of someone hearing a true thing about themselves before they're ready to receive it, precisely nothing. I understood it now. I had been trying to be comfortable in a seat that had never been sized for me, not because my mother was a cruel woman, but because she was a person with a limited amount of attention organized around a set of priorities she had established before she fully knew what any of us would become. And I had landed, through no fault of anyone's particularly, on the wrong side of those priorities. I had spent the years since trying to rearrange myself into the shape the seat required. I had made myself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. I had sent texts that said no problem and meant them just enough to keep going. The seat was never going to fit. The seat was never the problem. I looked across the table at Daniel, who was eating with the focused contentment of a man who had cooked something he was proud of, and was now eating it in the company of someone he had chosen repeatedly, and continued to choose, in the small daily ways that don't make for good stories but make for good lives. He had his reading glasses pushed up on his head even though there was nothing to read. He always did that when he was comfortable. I thought, I chose this. I set this table. I put both chairs here, and both plates, and both glasses, and both of us. And not one thing in this room was an afterthought. The burgundy dress was in the closet upstairs. I was wearing a cotton Henley I'd had since before we were married. Soft in the specific way that old fabric gets soft. A color that had started as navy and faded to something harder to name. I had not thought, when I'd pulled it on this afternoon, about whether it was the right thing to wear for an occasion. There was no occasion. That was the point. After dinner, we washed dishes in the way we always wash dishes. Daniel washed. I dried, a division of labor we'd arrived at in the first year, and never renegotiated because it worked, and because there are some arrangements in a life together that are so quietly correct, they become invisible. The radio played from his phone on the counter, something he'd put on without choosing carefully, a station that moved between things we half recognized. The rain was steady outside. The kitchen windows had fog slightly at the edges. I dried a bowl and set it on the rack and reached for another one, and Daniel handed it to me without looking. And outside, on Wickersham Lane, the evening went on. In its ordinary way, the neighbor's porch light coming on at 7, like it always did. A car passing slowly through the wet, someone walking a dog at the far end of the street under an umbrella that the wind was making complicated. There are moments you recognize as they happen, before you've had time to arrange language around them. This was one. I was standing in my own kitchen, in my old Henley, drying a bowl that needed drying, beside a man who knew when to knock before entering a room, and somewhere in the city my mother was having her evening, and my brother was having his, and Brooke was having hers, and Aunt Cheryl was almost certainly telling someone a story that had improved significantly in the retelling. And I was here, fully here, not thinking about whether I was welcome. For the first time in 37 years, I didn't wonder if I'd earned my seat. I'd said it myself. There's something nobody tells you about the quiet hurts the ones that don't arrive with a raised voice or a slammed door, but with a seating chart that somehow never has room for you, a photograph that gets taken while you're standing just outside the frame. They're harder to name than the loud ones, and because they're harder to name, they're easier to carry for years without ever setting them down. You tell yourself it's fine. You text back, no problem. And the strange thing is, you mean it just enough to keep going. What Elle learned, and what this story is really about, is the difference between tolerating a seat and choosing one. For most of her life, she had been trying to fit into a place that was never quite designed for her, adjusting her posture, making herself smaller, filling the silence with accommodation. The moment she stopped, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with a simple no. Let them enjoy their evening was the moment she stopped performing for an audience that had never really been watching. Here's the lesson that's worth carrying with you. You cannot negotiate your way into being seen by someone who has already decided not to look. And the most powerful thing you can do is not to force their eyes open, but to stop needing them to see you at all. That's not giving up. That is finally growing up. Walking away from a seat that was never yours isn't a loss. It's the first step toward building a table of your own. If this story stayed with you, ask yourself honestly, is there a seat in your life you've been trying to fit into for too long? And if someone in your life is still holding that chair, what would it take for you to finally stand up? Share your thoughts below. You might say exactly what someone else needed to hear today.